What's up, YouTube? So today I want to talk about everything I think you need to know about Unison and why it's actually such a powerful tool in the sound design process. And it's actually something that's quite overlooked when first getting into synthesis and stuff like that, because quite often when you first apply it and you don't really know what's going on, the results can be a little bit wishy-washy and they can kind of take away the power from a sound. However, if you understand the fundamentals of what it is and how to apply it for the best results, then it can actually be an incredibly powerful tool in sound design. So I'm going to try to discuss those aspects in this video. Let's dive in and have a look. So for those who already know what Unison is, this might be a little bit of a kind of basic video. However, a little bit later on, I'm going to get into some cool sound design techniques. So stick around for those, but I'm going to start off with a little bit of an explanation for those who might not fully understand exactly what's going on here. So I'm going to start off with Serum, based on the fact that it's got some pretty cool little tricks for Unison built in that can actually create some pretty compelling sounds. And it's going to help outline exactly what's happening here. First things first, the most simple explanation of exactly what Unison is actually visible in the little graphic readout of your oscillator over here. Essentially, if you put Unison onto 2, it copies your voice of the oscillator so that there's 2 copies, and allows you to detune them ever so slightly. So in Serum, the detune is kind of linked to the spread. So the further you detune them, the more kind of stereo effect you have. Other synths will have a option to change the change the panning and stuff depending. So over here in the global menu, we've got a couple of settings over here under Unison. And you may or may not have noticed these before, but there's a couple of really interesting things in here that I kind of quickly want to outline for you guys. So if we change this range to 6, what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to detune the oscillators by a semitone of 6. So full detune would be an octave. So you can actually change the range of semitones that Serum uses to detune these. So using this technique, you can get some incredibly fat sounds. Say for example, you're limited on your oscillator usage and you want to lay a kind of sub oscillator underneath, and you're already using the sub for something, then you can just use these kind of tricky Unison techniques to create that sub oscillator. Obviously, you'll have one higher, but what you could do is set it to 2 voices and set it to 6. Then you've got a low voice and a mid voice. So there's various different kind of other parameters here which I'm going to get into, but this stack is particularly cool. You've got various different ways that it stacks your oscillators. So center 12, I believe, stacks them from the center outwards. So you can get some like those THX intro kind of sound type things going on by using these settings over here. These warp modes and wavetable positions. So what these are, what I actually want to do here is let's just set this back to 1 or 2, I think is the default. Not so much a detuned kind of sound, because here what we're going to do is let's use these warp settings here. So what's going to happen here is it's going to apply a different warp mode to each of those Unison voices. So let's say, for example, set this to FM from B, turn this to 50%, and then I think it goes bipolar with the voices because we've got 3 voices. It'll be plus and minus. And then let's put in an oscillator here, turn down the level. Let's just set this to a sine wave. and turn it down an octave, 1 octave. So you can modulate this to create some really interesting effects. I actually want to set it to bipolar, turn it down a bit. So, of course, it works similarly with the wavetable position setting here. So let's do it on this side over here. And what we can do is we can have several voices, FMing several voices here. And let's choose an interesting set of shapes here. Like, let's go with some of these spectral ones are pretty cool. Then what we can do is turn this unison up. All sorts of crazy stuff you can do there. Some classic examples of unison is stuff like super saws. These are easy to create. Just, you know, max out your unison over there. Put on a filter kind of pluck. And turn down the sustain. So this is usually accompanied by like compression and reverb. And another interesting trick, let's just initialize this, is using the phasing properties of these detuning effect to create like weird kind of binaural phasing effects on a sine wave. So let's, for example, detune this by an octave and set it onto 2 unison. And I mean, you may not be hearing that. You may not be hearing that if you're listening on like a laptop or phone speakers, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to overdrive it. Cool effect, that one. One thing I want to show you guys is if we have a look at this spectrum analyzer here, look at the interesting things that happens to these harmonics when we use Unison. Does some weird kind of spikes there that move up and down. So a really interesting effect is to use these kind of spikes and stuff as like part of a kind of additive synthesis process, I guess. So one thing I've been really enjoying doing is stacking up these distortions within Phase Plant. So I'm going to put a couple of these here. Actually, I want to put 1, 2, put a filter in between them, and use the Unison, that kind of like effect with the harmonics, doing that weird thing to create like nice movement with this distortion. Check this out. So if we spread this a bit, and then let's say, for example, put it on a band pass, some high Q. You can create these kind of like very moving, distorted sounds that don't actually have any kind of like modulation in the patch. And these are cool to kind of like gate and do this kind of like cutoff thing. It's actually how a lot of guys kind of over distort these Unison sounds to get that kind of like very cutting nighttime psytrance synth sound. So actually what I want to try to do here is I've got a melody somewhere here which I want to pop in. And then we can just work with the MIDI that's already there. We can put MIDI modifier -4 so that it's in key with the track, and then we can turn it down a few octaves. Perfect. That sounds good. It's very loud. So actually what I want to do here is I actually want to outline a couple of things why Phase Plant is so cool. We can kind of do a complete mix here within the plugin. Let's do some low cuts, like 250 Hertz. Do some gain reduction here. Cool thing about this is like next time you open the patch, it's like going to be a good sort of volume, and it's not going to kind of like suddenly be much louder than any other patch in the track. I actually want to put some glide on here. There's some overlapping notes there. I think that's going to be interesting when it holds. You're going to hear that kind of movement from the Unison. So another thing to bear in mind is that each of these distortions has a very different character. So what I like to do is stack them up with all different types. So let's say, for example, do an overdrive, then saturation, and then quantize. This is a kind of cool like bit crushy type effect. But with this one, I don't like to overdrive it too much and then mix it down quite a lot. And what we can do here is let's put a random on, but I kind of like that slow movement that it does. And so here we can smooth this movement and put it like 1/8. Change it to unipolar and maybe make it a bit slower. I think that was a bit fast even. So here I like to use Transgate to create like these different patterns out of that melody that we've created, and setting the actual amount of steps to something that's off the kind of 16 or 8 or 4 kind of multiple creates some really interesting grooves. So another cool thing that Phase Plant has, I guess Serum has the kind of hyper effect, which you can do a similar thing. But here we've got a global unison setting. So this doesn't change the kind of like tonal characteristics of the distortion, like I was explaining with this oscillator detune unison. And it also works on like stacks of oscillators if you're creating a bunch of them. So let's just hear what this sounds like. Okay, so that's when my CPU starts dying a bit, because that's a bit... But one thing to bear in mind, this global unison does kind of chow quite a bit of CPU usage. So, you know, the moment I have like a heavy project and I start doing stuff like this, I'll bounce it out quite quickly. Because you get these kind of cool choppy kind of effects through this. I'll actually just make an example for you quickly. I want to save this patch. Choppy Unison Distortion 1. So here we can kind of create, you know, find the best kind of part and then create like a choppy effect. What I like to do is put this into an event and then do something like this. And then we can open this up and start editing this so that it'll kind of duplicate these edits across the board. That's pretty cool. I also like to do stuff like at the beginning of the bar, but then I'll change the kind of timing of the segment. So let's say, for example, find a random part there. Just chop this. I like to do stuff like on threes. So it'll be like boom, boom, and then carry it on like that. Awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. A big thanks to IDM Mag, proud supporters of the dance music scene and my channel. As always, I'm going to be posting this preset to my Patreon for all my $5 supporters, so if you want to know what that's all about, check out the link that's going to be in the description. See you guys next time.